the librarian who remembered every reader. Welcome to English Listening with Mai. This channel is designed to help improve your listening, vocabulary, and understanding of natural English through calm stories and everyday conversations. Today's story begins inside a quiet neighborhood library where one librarian has an unusual ability. She seems to remember every person who has ever borrowed a book. So relax, listen carefully, and enjoy the story. The Oakwood Public Library opened its doors every morning at exactly 9 o'clock. The building itself was not very large. It sat on the corner of Maple Avenue beside a small park. Tall windows filled the reading room with soft natural light. Rows of wooden shelves held thousands of books. And in the center of the room stood the front desk. Behind that desk worked Mrs. Eleanor Brooks. Most people simply called her Mrs. Brooks. She had been the head librarian for more than 30 years. During that time, thousands of readers had walked through the library doors. Children searching for adventure stories, students researching school projects, adults looking for quiet evenings with a good novel. And somehow, Mrs. Brooks seemed to remember all of them, not just their names, but their reading habits, their favorite authors, even the books they had borrowed years earlier. One Monday morning, a young man named Ryan stepped into the library for the first time. Ryan had recently moved into the neighborhood. He worked remotely as a graphic designer and had been searching for a quiet place to work during the day. When he discovered the library near the park, it seemed perfect, quiet, comfortable, and filled with books. He walked slowly between the shelves, glancing at the titles. After choosing a novel, he approached the front desk. Mrs. Brooks looked up from her computer. Her gray hair was tied neatly behind her head. Small reading glasses rested on the end of her nose. "Good morning," she said warmly. "Good morning," Ryan replied. "I just moved here and wanted to sign up for a library card." Mrs. Brooks smiled. "Well, welcome to Oakwood." She handed him a small form. Ryan filled out his name and address while she waited patiently. When he returned the form, she glanced at it briefly. "Ryan Carter," she said. "Yes." "You just moved into the apartments on Elm Street?" Ryan blinked in surprise. "How did you know that?" Mrs. Brooks smiled. "Most new residents there come here within the first week." Ryan laughed. "That makes sense." She typed something into the computer. Then she looked up again. "What kind of books do you enjoy?" Ryan thought for a moment. "Mostly mystery novels." Mrs. Brooks nodded immediately. "In that case," she stood from her chair and walked toward one of the shelves. Ryan followed her curiously. She pulled out a book and handed it to him. "Try this one." Ryan looked at the cover. "The Silent Garden." "Is it good?" he asked. Mrs. Brooks smiled knowingly. "3 other readers with your taste finished it last month." Ryan laughed. "That sounds promising." He checked out the book and thanked her before walking to one of the reading tables. But as he sat down, he noticed something interesting. Another reader approached the desk. Mrs. Brooks greeted her immediately. "Good morning, Claire." Claire smiled. "Good morning." Did you enjoy the history book you borrowed last week? Claire looked surprised. You remember that? Of course, Mrs. Brooks said calmly. You've borrowed books about medieval history 3 times this year. Ryan watched the interaction quietly. How could she remember something so specific? Later that afternoon, Ryan returned to the desk. I have to ask you something, he said. Mrs. Brooks looked up. Yes? How do you remember everyone's reading habits? Mrs. Brooks smiled gently. Well, when you spend enough time helping people find stories, you begin to remember their own. Ryan realized something important in that moment. For Mrs. Brooks, the library wasn't just about books. It was about the people who read them. Ryan returned to his table near the tall window. The morning sunlight fell softly across the wooden desk. Outside, a few people walked through the park beside the library. Inside, everything was calm. Quiet pages turning, soft footsteps between the shelves. Ryan opened The Silent Garden and began reading. But his mind kept drifting back to Mrs. Brooks. He had only met her a few minutes earlier, yet she had already suggested a book that seemed perfect for him. And the way she remembered the other reader, Claire, was impressive. Not just her name, but the exact type of book she enjoyed. Ryan read for nearly an hour. The novel was exactly what Mrs. Brooks had promised. Mysterious, well-written, difficult to put down. Eventually, he stood up to stretch his legs and walked slowly between the shelves. The library was busier now. A group of children sat on a colorful rug near the back of the room. A young assistant librarian read a story aloud while the children listened carefully. Near the front desk, an older man approached Mrs. Brooks with 2 books in his hands. Ryan watched from a distance. Good morning, Mr. Alvarez, Mrs. Brooks said warmly. The man smiled. Good morning, Eleanor. Returning the gardening books already? She asked. Yes, he replied. I finished them both. Mrs. Brooks chuckled softly. You always read faster in the spring. Mr. Alvarez laughed. That's true. Ryan raised his eyebrows slightly. Another reader, another memory. And again, Mrs. Brooks remembered something very specific. Later that afternoon, Ryan finished several chapters of the novel and returned to the desk to check the time. Mrs. Brooks looked up as he approached. Enjoying the book? Ryan nodded. It's really good. I thought you might like it. Ryan leaned slightly on the desk. Can I ask you something? Of course. How long have you worked here? Mrs. Brooks thought for a moment. 32 years. Ryan whistled softly. That's longer than I've been alive. Mrs. Brooks laughed. Yes, I suppose it is. Ryan glanced around the room. Have you really helped all these people find books for that long? Mrs. Brooks followed his gaze. Yes. Ryan paused before asking his next question. So, do you really remember everyone? Mrs. Brooks adjusted her glasses slightly. Not everyone, she said modestly, but many of them. How? Ryan asked. Mrs. Brooks rested her hands on the desk. Well, she began slowly, when someone tells you the kind of story they love, you begin to learn something about who they are. Ryan nodded. That makes sense. She continued, some readers love adventure. Some prefer quiet stories. Others search for books that help them understand the world. Ryan listened carefully. And over time, she said, those patterns become familiar. Ryan thought about that. So remembering books is really about remembering people. Mrs. Brooks smiled. Exactly. At that moment, the library doors opened again. A teenage girl entered and walked toward the desk. Mrs. Brooks greeted her immediately. Hello, Mia. Hi, the girl replied. Are you here for another science fiction novel? Mia laughed. How did you know? Mrs. Brooks smiled knowingly. You've borrowed one every Friday for the past 2 months. Ryan shook his head slowly. That's incredible. Mrs. Brooks simply shrugged. I just pay attention. Ryan looked around the library again. The quiet readers, the shelves filled with stories, the peaceful atmosphere. For the first time since moving to the neighborhood, Ryan felt like he had found a place that truly belonged to the community. And at the center of it all was a librarian who seemed to remember every reader who walked through the door. But Ryan would soon discover something even more surprising. Mrs. Brooks did not just remember books. She remembered moments in people's lives. And sometimes, those memories mattered far more than the stories on the shelves. The afternoon passed quietly inside the Oakwood Library. Sunlight moved slowly across the floor as the hours went by. Ryan continued reading his novel, but every now and then he glanced toward the front desk. Each time someone approached Mrs. Brooks, the same thing happened. She greeted them warmly. She remembered their names, and often she remembered something about their lives, not just their reading preferences, something personal, something human. Around 3 o'clock, a woman in her late 40s entered the library. She walked slowly toward the desk, carrying a small stack of books. Ryan noticed the way Mrs. Brooks' expression softened when she saw her. Hello, Mrs. Patel, Mrs. Brooks said kindly. Mrs. Patel smiled. Hello, Eleanor. Ryan watched as Mrs. Patel placed the books on the desk. I finished these much faster than I expected, she said. Mrs. Brooks glanced at the titles. Poetry again. Mrs. Patel nodded. It helps me relax. Mrs. Brooks typed something into the computer before looking up again. How is your daughter doing at university? Mrs. Patel's face brightened. She's doing well. She called yesterday. That's wonderful, Mrs. Brooks said. Ryan was surprised again. She remembered not only Mrs. Patel's reading habits, but also details about her family. After Mrs. Patel left, Ryan approached the desk again. You remembered her daughter, he said. Mrs. Brooks looked slightly confused. Of course. Ryan shook his head gently. I've met neighbors 3 times and still forget their names. Mrs. Brooks smiled. People matter. Ryan thought about that. Do you ever forget anything? Mrs. Brooks laughed softly. Oh, I forget many things. Like what? Where I put my glasses? Ryan laughed. But when someone tells you a small part of their life, she continued, it stays with you. Ryan leaned against the desk again. Has anyone ever surprised you? Mrs. Brooks thought for a moment. Yes, many times. Can you give an example? Mrs. Brooks looked toward the window for a moment. Then she said something interesting. There was a boy who used to come here every afternoon. Ryan listened. He rarely spoke, she continued. He would borrow science books, very difficult ones. How old was he? Ryan asked. 12. Ryan raised his eyebrows. That's young? Mrs. Brooks nodded. He came almost every day, always quiet, always focused. Ryan imagined the scene, a young boy sitting alone among tall shelves. So, what happened to him? Ryan asked. Mrs. Brooks smiled proudly. He's now a professor at the university across town. Ryan's eyes widened. You're serious? Yes. He still visits once a year. Ryan laughed. And I'm guessing you remember his favorite books. Mrs. Brooks smiled. Of course. At that moment, the library clock chimed softly. 4 o'clock. The children's reading group began packing up their things. The room slowly became quieter again. Ryan looked around the library. Do you ever get tired of doing the same job every day? Mrs. Brooks shook her head. Never. Why not? Because every reader brings a new story with them. Ryan looked thoughtful. That's a nice way to see it. Mrs. Brooks nodded. Books are important, but the people who read them are even more interesting. Ryan looked around the library again. For most people, a library was simply a place filled with books. But for Mrs. Brooks, it was a place filled with lives, memories, moments, and stories that continued far beyond the pages. Ryan didn't realize it yet, but soon he would become one of those stories too. The afternoon slowly faded into evening. Outside the tall windows of the Oakwood Library, the sunlight began to soften. The park beside the building grew quieter. Most of the readers had already packed their bags and left for the day. Ryan remained at his table near the window, finishing another chapter of The Silent Garden. When he finally looked up, he noticed something surprising. The library was almost empty. Only 2 readers remained quietly studying near the back shelves. Ryan closed the book gently. He stood up and walked toward the front desk. Mrs. Brooks was organizing a small stack of returned books. Finished already? She asked with a smile. Ryan laughed. Not yet, but I'm getting close. I told you it was a good one. You were right. Ryan placed the book on the desk. I'll probably finish it tonight. Mrs. Brooks nodded approvingly. That's the sign of a good mystery. Ryan glanced around the room again. Is it always this quiet in the evening? Most days, Mrs. Brooks said. People come during the morning or early afternoon. Ryan leaned slightly against the desk. I think I understand something now. Mrs. Brooks looked curious. What's that? This library isn't really about books. Mrs. Brooks raised an eyebrow. Oh? Ryan gestured toward the empty tables. It's about the people who come here. Mrs. Brooks smiled. That's true. Ryan continued. You remember everyone because you care about them. Mrs. Brooks paused for a moment before answering. That helps? Ryan picked up his book again. I think that's why people like coming here. Mrs. Brooks tilted her head slightly. Why do you say that? Because when people walk in here, they're not just another visitor. They're someone you remember. Mrs. Brooks looked thoughtful. That may be true. At that moment, the library doors opened quietly. A man in his 30s stepped inside. Ryan noticed that Mrs. Brooks immediately smiled. Good evening, Daniel, she said warmly. The man laughed. Good evening, Mrs. Brooks. Ryan watched with curiosity. Daniel approached the desk. Returning another philosophy book? Mrs. Brooks asked. Daniel placed a book on the counter. You know me too well. Ryan laughed quietly. Mrs. Brooks continued. Did you enjoy this one? Daniel nodded. It gave me a lot to think about. Mrs. Brooks scanned the book and handed him another one from the desk drawer. You might enjoy this author too. Daniel looked surprised. You already picked one for me? Mrs. Brooks smiled. I had a feeling you'd finish the other one today. Daniel shook his head with a laugh. I swear you know all of us better than we know ourselves. Ryan couldn't help smiling. When Daniel left, Ryan turned back toward Mrs. Brooks. You really do remember everyone. Mrs. Brooks shrugged gently. I just listen. Ryan thought about that for a moment. In a world where people often rush through conversations, Mrs. Brooks had chosen something different. She paid attention. She remembered small details, and those details made people feel seen. Ryan picked up his book and prepared to leave. I'll probably be back tomorrow, he said. Mrs. Brooks smiled. I expected that. Ryan paused at the door. You know something? What? She asked. I think this might be the best place in the neighborhood. Mrs. Brooks chuckled softly. I've always believed that. Ryan stepped outside into the cool evening air. Behind him, the library lights glowed warmly through the tall windows. Inside that quiet building, thousands of books waited patiently on their shelves. But the real reason people kept returning was a librarian who remembered their stories. Because sometimes being remembered is just as meaningful as being understood. Vocabulary review. Habit. Something a person does regularly. Example, Mrs. Brooks remembered the reading habits of many visitors. Thoughtful, showing care and attention for others. Example, Mrs. Brooks was a thoughtful librarian. Community, a group of people living or working together. Example, the library was an important place for the community. Memorable, something that is easy to remember because it is special. Example, Ryan's first visit to the library became a memorable experience. Reflection. Question. Think about this. Have you ever visited a place where someone remembered you even after a long time? Sometimes small acts of attention can make a place feel like home.